You know, when I show up at a homepage like how Node/is currently is, I know I'm just itching to whip out my payment card and send that company some money. Everything about it screams professionalism and increases my trust factor. Oh wait, no, that's the exact opposite this homepage screams. We need to clean this up so that Node/ doesn't look like a complete wasteland, or worse, a where's site. Enter less. Less is what we call a CSS preprocessor. In fact, that's what less calls itself too. Browsers right now only understand CSS for styling, yet writing raw CSS I think is a real pain sometimes, especially as a developer. Let's have a look at some of the problems that less solves for us. If we run make_dir public style sheets, we'll create a directory where we can store some style sheets. If you recall, in our configuration file, we set up the static middleware for serving static files. And that's exactly what a CSS file is, a static file. In our configuration, we look for static files from within the public directory. So I can create a simple style sheet and we'll call it dummy.css. And we'll store it in public style sheets dummy.css. Now I've already made that file and I've already put a little bit of styling into it. There's nothing earth-shattering here. I've just made a single class and I've given it a background color and some padding. Of course, this file won't do anything if we don't actually pull it into our project. So let's, pardon me, a little paste job here, but nothing special here. We're just adding in a style sheet link tag. And notice that we're going off the root style sheets dummy.css. And we also need to make sure we use the style in our markup. So let's go ahead and wrap Borgeroth's message in this system message div. And make sure we have our server running. Then we can pop on over to the browser, reload the page, and look at that. Borgeroth's message is in a gray box. Isn't that fantastic? Now let's suppose that we wanted to change that message to a nice administrator blue. Let's first also add another paragraph in here just for fun with some text. Now when we go to make this color change, we might notice that the message is contained in a p tag, and so we could just come down here and put in a little rule for ourselves like this. That'll give us a nice little blue color. But now when we reload the page, it looks like both paragraphs picked up that nice administrator blue. That's not quite what we want. Silly mistake, and we know how to fix it easily. Since we only want the p tags that are children of system messages, we just have to put system message in front of our CSS file like so. And then when we reload the page, we get exactly what we wanted. Borgeroth's message is in administrator blue, but can't see save the kingdom remains in black. So while that is pretty simple, I get bothered at having to add in the parent again. I think it would be much more natural to just nest the p tag styling inside of its parent, you know, exactly like how it is in the HTML markup. Wouldn't it be nice if we could style it something like this? Well, guess what? That's perfectly valid less. That's one of the big reasons why I like to use less. Of course, if we reload the page, it will break right now because we haven't hooked less up yet. So let's go do that. To install less, we're going to need two packages. We need less itself so that we can use less, but then we're also going to use the less middleware package so that we can hook less into our Express middleware stack. The middleware will pull in less for us, and we have no plans right now to access less directly. So all we need to install is the middleware. We do that by running npm install, of course, helps to do it in the right window, -- save, and then less middleware. Now there was a rather large breaking change made to less middleware recently, so please verify you have the right version by running npm list less middleware. npm list will give you the versions of the packages you have installed locally. We're only interested in less middleware, so that's why we put that filtering param in. You want to make sure that you have something in the 2x range, the 0.2.x range. If you're just installing it now, that's what you should get. But if for some reason you pulled in a 0.1.x build, this will not work for you. Drop a line in the show notes if this is happening, and we can work on a fix. All right, so let's go ahead and set this up. First of all, we need to require the middleware. And of course, to do that, we need to open the file where we're going to put that. So right here, mention that we're configuring less. And we require the middleware just like we'd require any other package with a simple require statement. Next, we're going to need 3 options objects. So let's just type those out real quick. The first one is, we'll call less middleware options. And then we'll also need less parser options. And finally, less compiler options. And we will flesh these out in just a second here. But basically, the big breaking change that I mentioned a moment ago was that it used to be when you used the less middleware that all 3 of these different options would be crammed into a single object. But starting with the 0.2.x series, those are broken out into 3 separate objects. There are some things that configure the middleware, and that's the less middleware options. And then underneath the hood of the middleware, there is the less package itself, and there are separate options for its parser and compiler. Let's go ahead and actually wire up the middleware before we flesh out those options. So we do that with the standard app.app.use. Then we reference the middleware that we're using. Bear with me for 1 second on this argument. And then we just plug in those 3 options that we had. And I noticed we have a typo, so let's of course fix that. And then see less parser options and less compiler options. And there we have wired the middleware up. So let's talk about this first argument here. The first one is where the middleware will look for our less source files. And we're going to put them in app style sheets. So with that in place, let's go ahead and move. We had dummy.css there in public style sheets. Actually, before we do that, we need to make that directory style sheets. And then we can move dummy.css to app style sheets dummy.less. Less files take the .less extension. So we simply told the middleware, look in app style sheets for the less files that you will turn into CSS and deliver to the browser. All right, let's go flesh out those options now. First, to the middleware itself, we need to tell the middleware where to place the CSS files that it generates. And we do that with the dest option. And so we'll give it the value app.apppath public. Next, we want the URLs inside of our style sheets to be relative to where they were included. So we use the relative URLs option and we give that the value of true. Following that, when we're in development mode, we always want to regenerate the files with every request. So we just set that to whether or not we're currently running in development mode. There is another option called once. And if this is set to true, then we'll only check to see if the file should be regenerated one time. We want that to be the opposite of whether or not we're in development, because that's a nice feature to have enabled in production. And then lastly, we're going to use the debug option, which will put debugging messages in the console. Again, we want that if we are in development mode. So those are the configuration options we pass to the middleware itself. We do use one parser option, and that is the dump line numbers option. And we're going to set that to media query, which probably doesn't make any sense right this second, but we will show that in just a few seconds. And then for our compiler options, we're going to use the compress setting. And we don't want to compress in development mode. So again, we're going to go with whether or not our current environment is development. Now, if compress is set to true, then this option won't have any effect. So just keep in mind that if you want to see the result of dump line numbers, you need to make sure that you're not compressing the resulting file. And again, in just a second, we'll show what this option actually does to our generated file. Okay, so these changes will require a server restart. So let's go ahead and do that. And boo, it turns out we had a rogue comma on line 63. So let's fix that and actually restart our server. And another boo, turns out you do have to write syntactically correct JavaScript for this all to work. So let's actually go ahead and reboot that server. Hooray. So if we pop over to the browser now and reload, what do we see? Uh-oh, the styling went away. Why is that? Well, if we have a look at our developer tools and head over to network, we'll have to actually reload the page here. You see we have a problem with dummy.css, and if we head to the console, we can see that it was a 404 not found. That's kind of odd. What might be the cause of that? Less Middleware puts out some sweet debug statements for us. Let's have a look at those. Notice where it's trying to find the file. It outputs where the source is, and it's trying to find it in app stylesheets dummy.less. But in fact, we need to get rid of one of those levels of style sheets. So here's an amazing graphical representation of what's going on. We have an incoming request to the path stylesheets dummy.css, and we've configured our app to use app stylesheets as the place it's looking for it. Essentially what's happening is that when it puts everything together, it's just taking these two paths and sticking them together. And, you know, the browser lines it up a little bit better or whatever. And that's why we need to get rid of one of these style sheets. So have no fear, there is a config option for that, and it's kind of an odd one, but it goes into the less middleware options, and there's this pre-process object we can supply. And in that pre-process, we can supply something called path, which is a function which takes two parameters, path name and rec. Path name, of course, will be the path name as it's supplied to us. So what we want to do is simply take that path name and the style sheets /style sheets that's coming in our incoming request. We just want to get rid of that. So now when we restart the server, look at that, our styling is back. And just to be asininely thorough, let's have a look at what that path name actually was before we started munging it. That will require restarting, heading back to the browser, reloading the page, and then we come back to our console and we can see that it was this big old long concatenation of absolute path and so forth. So all we did was grab the first instance of /stylesheets and get rid of it. Now I did promise I'd show what dump line numbers actually does. So let's head over to our browser, we'll view the page source, and we'll pull up dummy.css. You can see here that it's inserted these media queries with this debug information that gives the line number where this styling came from. So let's have a look at what that would be if we had instead used comments, which is another one of the options that less provides. If we then reload the page, you can see it just inserts CSS comments. Now the difference is that browser tools are getting a little bit smarter so that they're becoming aware of preprocessors. So using media query and the right browser extensions, you can actually do more intelligent debugging with it. So to finish up for this week, let's have a look at one last thing. Let's go to dummy.less. And it wouldn't be hard to imagine that we might take this administrator blue and use it in a lot of different places. Let's say that we had it in, 20 other places. Now imagine that we wanted to change the color that we used to represent administrators. Well, in normal CSS, you'd have to hunt down every stinking place where you use the color. But watch this trick. Less lets us use variables. That's right, that magic concept that removed magic numbers from our source code can also be used in our CSS now. To make one, we just use @administrator text color, give it a name, and then supply the value that we want that to have. And with this variable defined, we can then just come down to where we actually use it, like so. Of course, we actually wanted to change the color, even if temporarily. So we can do that. And then we pop back over to the page, reload, and look at that. Now it's green instead of administrator blue. If we had been defining those 20 different references to this color using the variable, changing it is now a single change as opposed to, 20 plus all the hunt to go find it. Well, less goes well beyond just variables. It lets us do functions and mix-ins. We can even import other less files into one so that we can modularize our styling as well as our source code. We're not going to get into how to do that right now because this episode is more about integrating less with Node than it is about how to use less extensively. If I hear enough feedback, I'll roll an episode on less. For now though, we have learned how to integrate less with Node/. This is critical for next week when we make this game look less dumpy. We're going to incorporate Twitter Bootstrap next week, and because we set up less, we'll be able to easily customize our Bootstrap styling if we so desire. Now keep in mind less does have some competitors. You may have heard of Sass. It does the same sort of thing but with a different style. We went with less here because although Bootstrap recently started supporting Sass, the Node support for it is still listed as experimental. So for now, less is more. Till next week, happy coding. This episode is brought to you by Cover My App. If you run a Node.js or Ruby on Rails web application, then you know how much of a pain it is to keep your several dependencies up to date. And if you've also heard about vulnerabilities like the Rails YAML parsing issue from early 2013, you know how serious it is too. If you want to learn more about reducing that pain and keeping your app covered, head over to covermyapp.com and sign up for the free 5-day course.